We've moved on, but we haven't moved that much further on, right? There still isn't good, solid agreement on what it means to build or innovate around a smart and sustainable community and city. Some people will say it's all about IoT. Yeah, that's what. Yeah. Some people will say it's just about data, right? I think it's a bigger topic myself. I think fundamentally it's about quality of life in all its forms. It's a very large topic. And because of that, that does make it hard to define.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings, folks. Welcome along to this episode of the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. It was great to be in Christchurch recently and to visit the Christchurch Innovation Expo. And while I was there, I got a chance to sit down with my friend Jonathan Reichental, or Professor Jonathan Reichental to be more accurate, who was based in Silicon Valley. He's an expert in technology and urban innovation and founder of Human Future, a business and technology advisory, investment and education firm. He's been recognised as a top chief information officer in the US and around the world. He was keynote speaker at the Innovation Expo and was also in New Zealand earlier on in the year as part of an academic exchange program at Victoria University. In today's episode, Jonathan and I dive deep into designing smarter, safer and more sustainable cities and communities for the future through digitisation, automation and other aspects of innovation. Before we begin, I'd like to thank, of course, our wonderful show partners, 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. Let's dive in. Jonathan Reichental. Good to see you again, Jonathan.
It's great to see you, Paul, here in New Zealand. It's terrific.
Yeah, I think last time we caught up was probably in Silicon Valley, so it's been a few years.
It has. Yeah. We did some virtual stuff too.
Yes,
but it was great to have you over in my neck of the woods. That was lovely.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to talk about here in Christchurch. We've been really in it with a lot of tech and innovation, aerospace things going on over a period of sort of a week or so. Mm-hmm. You've been here in Christchurch to keynote at the Innovation Summit. That's the main thing that sort of brought you down to this part of the world again, I take it?
Yeah, well, it doesn't take much because I love this country. I really do. I'm not saying that because I'm sitting with you. I genuinely love New Zealand. I had a chance to come here earlier this year for 5 weeks. I was a visiting professor at the Victoria University of Wellington. And that really was just an excuse for me to tour the country a little bit and get to know more parts of it. And I achieved that. But I had a good time teaching at the university as well and spending time in Wellington. And so when the chance came to come back and be part of this Innovation Expo here as part of Smart Christchurch, the government program, the local government program, I said, tell me more. That sounds fabulous. So they have been doing a lot of stuff. Yesterday, I did a talk on, I was on a panel for cybersecurity, and then in the morning, I did a talk on artificial intelligence. And today, did a workshop for kids, which was amazing, about the future of cities. And then later today, my final keynote will be a talk on the role of data culture. Today is more industry focused. Yesterday was a bit more family oriented. So yeah, I'm here for this. I'm going to spend a few extra days to enjoy myself here in Christchurch too.
That's great. Now, in terms of the sort of areas that you look at, you were the Chief Information Officer for the city of Palo Alto. I think when I visited you last time. So your interest and your expertise is very broad as far as technology goes. You tap into lots of different areas. I think smart cities was probably the topic that we first interacted in, and that's part of the discussion at the Innovation Expo in Christchurch. But obviously lots of other areas too. Books, you've been putting out books on a range of topics. Mm-hmm. A data governance book recently. Mm-hmm. Crypto. I think sort of more broader blockchain related content and courses as well. That are available
online. So how do you find the time to put all these things together, and what are the things that are really exciting you at the moment?
Yeah. Well, fundamentally, I'm an educator. So whether I'm at university teaching, or I'm writing a book, or developing a course, or even doing this with you right now, it's all about inspiring others, sharing knowledge, learning from others too when I can. I learn a lot from you and everyone I meet doing these things and being part of these events. The topics I choose generally are the ones where I think they will cause change. I'm hoping and supporting positive change. I try to get a little ahead of the game too. I try to be a little bit of a futurist in saying what's next. That's always been sort of a theme in my 30-year career. And you mentioned I was working at the city of Palo Alto, and I completed that work. Essentially, the city manager was leaving, and I thought to myself, do I want to stay on longer and get to know a new city manager and start over in some ways? I said, this is a great point for me to wind down my work and then think about what's next. I love the work so much. I love the public work I was doing, working with cities. This was the thing that was getting me really excited. So I thought, hey, I can do this not just for one city, but I can leave now and try to scale this up so I can deliver and be helpful to communities all over the world. So I did that when I left the city, and now about 6 years ago, believe it or not. But I found also private companies were very interested in the work I was doing too, whether it was strategy or just a little bit of futurism. And the topics that I was choosing, whether it was data, blockchain, cities, fourth industrial revolution, AI, and more. And so, this is what I do full time now. So, when you asked about how do I find the time, it's about me making this a priority. And is anyone, and like yourself, an entrepreneur who runs an organization, you're prioritizing all the time. And I have to figure out where to spend my time. What is not only, my priority is what's most meaningful and impactful, but also, that I have to run a business and, pay bills and things. I got to make sure I'm doing the stuff that is there's a market for and there's demand. So in effect, I have this set of topics. And final point on this, to really kind of get to the crux of it, is my portfolio of topics that you'll hear me speak about at conferences and things constantly evolves as the society and the world progresses. So I don't hang on to old topics that have sort of had their time, or maybe they've just gone mainstream, or they're now a commodity. I'm trying to think ahead a little bit, and so that forces me to create new content. But I'm carrying that sort of a set of portfolio topics along with me that's of the same quantity, and that's how I think I do it. Just a matter of prioritizing and making the time for what's important.
Now let's go back to smart cities, because it's still a very relevant a very relevant topic. We're obviously at a different place now from when you and I were first talking about smart cities, and as we've discussed, you travel a fair bit. You were recently in Vienna and keynoting there. And you mentioned to me, Vienna very much in a very, key position in terms of smart cities globally.
Yeah.
So what does the future kind of look like for a city like Vienna that would be considered at the forefront, but of course, they're looking forward and still need to innovate from their current position.
Yeah. No, it's I love that. That question and how you think about it as well. Like, the field has changed enormously, and even though it's hard to put a number on it, maybe we're 15 years into this, maybe at best, right? And the beginning was chaos, was sort of scrambling, everybody sort of defining it themselves. We've moved on, but we haven't moved that much further on, right? There still isn't good, solid agreement on what it means to build or innovate around a smart and sustainable community and city. Some people will say it's all about IoT. That's what. Yeah. Some people will say it's just about data, right? I think it's a bigger topic myself. I think fundamentally it's about quality of life in all its forms. Whether that's economic, political, health, education. It's a very large topic, and because of that does make it hard to define. Like if one community does really good in, let's say, the healthcare space, and another does really good in the education, it's very hard then to compare them. They're doing what's important to them. They're doing what their community needs. They're focusing on what strengths they have in delivering their city. I will say, sort of, if we kind of look over the last decade, there's much broader recognition that we need to do more innovation in our communities. We need to use digital a lot more, and the opportunity for growth there is abundant. I mean, of the thousands and thousands of cities in the world, how many are investing heavily and focusing on smart and sustainable communities is still a small percentage, right? We need, if we're going to have a global movement, a lot more communities are going to have to come on board and recognize the things they need to do. Eventually they will, because they'll be forced to. But it's good to sort of get ahead of that. The technologies have matured a little bit. There is a greater appreciation of data management and data governance within cities. CIOs are better equipped and more enlightened about needs. The traditional government CIO perhaps didn't have a technical background, and they sort of were promoted up to the position they were at. Today, cities are hiring very competent, skilled technology professionals and strategists increasingly, and that's a good sign. They're also hiring data scientists, and they're hiring cybersecurity professionals. So there's greater focus on that. Vienna was fascinating because, at the end of the day, you want to be able to go to a city and experience what it actually means. Like, a lot of cities have a lot of stuff in the background. It runs systems at the city. You never see it. You don't know.
Yes.
But can you actually, as a visitor or somebody who goes to live in a place, feel the difference? Can you actually experience that the community is different? And Vienna has that feeling. There's several cities in the world that I visit that are like that. And I will say Christchurch has that. Has it happening? They're on their journey. They're several years in now, and you start to see, for example, even manifesting in the environment, things like sensors in the river that goes through the center of the city, so that they can take action to make it a cleaner river. It's historically actually being problematic. You see, for example, a lot of data and capabilities around proactive earthquake anticipation and response.
Yes, I was hearing they've got about 150
Yes.
sensors now,
Yes.
spread right around Christchurch, so they can measure whatever happens in terms of movements that they didn't have before. Some of those testing out or ensuring that they know the status of different buildings, which is very hard for them to measure in the past, right?
Oh, so much so. And that's like, to me, that's really making a big impact. That is life or death. I mean, that's really the core of having a community that functions well. In Wellington, when I spent some time there earlier this year, they also have an earthquake sensor network, and they have a fair amount of wobbling, from time to time. So people evacuate buildings, and then in the central business district, the public safety officials can look at the sensor data and know whether people can go back in the buildings, because the sensors have given enough information to make that decision quickly. That's game changing.
Some of those decisions were taking months and months previously to work out whether a building was safe or not.
Yeah.
Or sometimes people are left in a building because it's probably okay, and then later, might be 3-6 months later, they realize, actually, no, not so good. You probably shouldn't be in that building, which then means you probably shouldn't have been in that building for the last 6 months. So if you can get that, instantly with sensors, that's pretty handy.
Yeah, and this is making it real. This is not some sort of abstract notion. This is making the city safer and better to live in. Going back to Vienna, you see lots of public transport options. You see some expanding bicycle networks. This is a big part of the smart city movement these days. It's just support for bicycles, right? People think it's all digital, it's all data. No, often it's just about having bicycle lanes so people can have choices and they can have a healthier lifestyle, right? And so you see a lot of that. Good light rail system, a lot of digital services. So if you need to work with government or get a government service, there's probably an app or a website that works pretty efficiently. But the other thing you notice is the city sort of has a gentle cadence to it. People, how you define what it means to enjoy your life within a city is more than just, apps and the capabilities. It's about, do you have quiet places that you can go? Like, can you sit in a park and know that it's quiet and you have time for your own thoughts? It's can you drink water from any tap? Or do you have to buy bottled water? Are there places where you can actually, nice social places that are safe and outdoors, and meeting places and creating what we call placemaking, and you see that in abundance, and it's all integrated with a lot of art and culture, quickly shifting over to somewhere else, like you go to somewhere like Singapore, right? And so, what does Singapore look like today as a very smart and sustainable community? Well, they've hit a metric of about over 92% of all government services now are digital. You can access pretty much everything on your smartphone, right? That's an aspiration only most communities in the world could look forward to or aspire to, I suppose. And yet they've hit it. They've made that a target, and they've established that.
I guess you're gonna end up in some places having a challenge where everything gets to fully digital, and then you've got some people who are less digitally inclined, and so you've got maybe a very small minority that you have to work out how to cater to with sort of non-digital or less digital types of mechanisms as well. I guess that's got to be part of the balancing act with becoming digital. And for folks like us that are digital, it's like, this is brilliant. But you hear of other people that are maybe being a little bit left out.
Well, you want to avoid that. That's an exceptionally good point. And when I was leading a lot of these initiatives in the city I was part of, that was always top of mind, because we were very aggressive in our digitalization projects. But when we digitalized the service, we didn't shut down the manual, the analog version. We still allowed people to make a phone call, or we still had the place people could go in person. There still could be a form that you could fill out, or you could have a person help you fill out an online form. I actually encourage that. I don't want to see in the near term communities shut off that, because that is an equity issue, and we don't want that. As you say, in a generation or two, it becomes less of an issue, but let's manage that transition in a much healthier way, because that we don't want to create more issues than we solve, right?
Mm-hmm. And it seems, if we look across the technology world, there's all sorts of best practices on how we do things, how we should utilize technologies, how they should be configured, how we deal with cybersecurity, business continuity, data governance, and so on. And it seems that's very much happening in the in the government and local sort of government world. So we're seeing these sort of standards, and some of them are a little bit jarring, right? One of the things we've had in Auckland is in the sort of inner city speed limits have come down to 30 kilometres an hour, and I'm used to being able to duck out, get to a meeting across town at at a particular pace. That's now it's a little bit slower, but that's just a best practice. It's happening kind of all around the world, and it creates a different sort of environment as those best practices sort of come in, but they also, I guess, create some debate and some discomfort for folks that have been used to operating in a particular way
change
for a long time.
Of course. It's a human thing. I like to say it this way: we often want the change without the change. Right? We want a different outcome without changing anything, and that's just a contradiction, right? But I love the example you gave, because all around the world, we've had incredible ideas and innovation about how do you reduce accidents in streets and car accidents. And in fact, in the US, we have the Vision Zero. It may be an international thing, but I certainly know it in the US, where we're trying to, over the next few years, essentially try to eliminate as best we can bicycle accidents and pedestrian accidents, car accidents. We shouldn't accept the high numbers we have today, and yet we kind of live with high numbers of terrible tragedies. And And so, we have all this incredible science, but at the end of the day, it turns out that if you ask people to slow down, that's actually has the biggest impact. And we've got so many examples now of communities where they, in those sort of congested inner areas, going from 45 to now 30, maybe to 25 to 20, and you see a direct correlation with outcomes, and people will fight it, and then it's different. But I mean, we have to do the right thing, and we look. Debate is good. Well, I think we encourage the debate, but at the end of the debate, we got to conclude. We got to move forward. And then I think what happens eventually is if we do see good results, people get used to it and becomes habitual, and then we move on.
And look, there's a degree to which sometimes life in a modern world is a bit too fast paced, right? And actually, there's some benefits in slowing down, but
interesting.
It's getting your head around these things and how it relates to each of us individually, how the benefits impact the broader community as well. And we have this sort of similar goal for a target for they call it the road toll here in New Zealand, to zero deaths. That there's on the other side of the coin the challenge that we're creating this cotton wool environment for each next generation, and there are some downsides to that, right? When you can't let kids climb trees or do anything without there being so much kind of caution around. So it's a little bit of a I guess a journey and a balancing act, working what are the right things to do, because I guess if you wanted to stop road accidents entirely, then we just all walk everywhere, right?
Well, I think the answer ultimately is autonomous vehicles, right? Folks who like to drive cars don't like this conversation at all, but it may be inevitable. It does, in my research, appears to be that we are trending towards a world where vehicles will drive themselves. And the idea is that today we have, unfortunately, about 1.4 million people die a year in car accidents. Why? Because humans are not very good at driving cars, right? And they do things like they drink and drive. They have drugs. So they're sleepy. They just make mistakes. Those are the kinds of things that computers don't do. They're better at that. They're better at being attentive, and so the notion is, look, I'm not going to make the argument that we'll eliminate all accidents, but if we could reduce it by half or 70%, that's phenomenal. There's a lot of people who will be alive each year that may not be otherwise. And so I think the autonomous vehicles coming to cities and all our communities eventually is what's ahead of us. And it, in fact, very impactful, because when you think of smart and sustainable, well, these autonomous vehicles will be electric, right? Likely not owned, so will be on demand. It may mean less vehicles. We don't know for sure, but so more efficient in the environment. So helping reduce and eliminate carbon emissions, but also the ability for us to redesign our cities. Right? I spent the morning with 75 kids here in Christchurch, coming from all sorts of communities. What an amazing group! I think, by the way, New Zealand is in good hands. These kids were good. Wow, we talked about autonomous vehicles, and they're all over it. They're all like, yeah, totally. There's no doubt, and this is what they see as the future. But I was explaining to them that cities are largely the product of cars that have human drivers, and I mean our modern cities, and when you take the human out of it, and now the computers are driving the vehicles, the way that we design intersections and we use traffic signals and we have parking systems, everything is up for grabs. Everything it's possible to reinvent, and I think that's the big surprise for us over the next maybe half a century, is you have this domino effect. We're gonna see rapid adoption of autonomous vehicles, and then we're going to see the kind of infrastructure response to that, and it gives us more options. It allows us to think differently. Whereas in a city captive to automobiles, you have a lot of limitations and a lot of challenges.
You do. Now, being based around the sort of Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay area.
Yeah.
A number of those trials are going on.
Yeah.
There, especially within San Francisco. what I found when I chat to most people is I'm like, oh, can you get one of these autonomous vehicles to pick you up from your house? And most often the answer is no. They don't cover my area. What's your answer?
Well, I would have to say there are at least two providers. There's Cruise and Google's former Waymo are the two offerings, and they are in an advanced experimental phase. So they're by driving around, sometimes with people in them, they're just capturing data, and that data is helping it get more intelligent as a computer system. And up until recently, there were limited areas. The areas have grown and grown, and now Cruise, for example, goes everywhere in San Francisco, and that means places where people thought autonomous vehicles would struggle, like complicated streets, hills, places where there's road work, complicated intersections. We've overcome it. We're there. We can now have the car be pretty independent. We do have lots of reports of like the vehicle's called Cruise. The Cruise vehicle sort of just kind of stopping in the middle of the road because it's really, there is a challenge, right? The software is like doesn't know what to do, or it goes through red light and the cops come, and try to pull it over, which is interesting. And then there's these YouTube videos of the cop going up to the window and sort of knocking on the window to talk to somebody. And there's nobody in the car, and they're like, "What do you do? What do the police do?" They're not even prepared for that. And these are some of the things we're going to have to fix. So to your question. It's still not like you can't, like you can with Uber or the other providers, call up a Cruise to go to the airport and you're good to go. It is a limited use right now in terms of who can use it. Possibly, I hope I'm right in saying this, it's by invitation right now, but it's growing and we're close to, when I say close, we're within a few short years of seeing this be mainstream. Cruise is already looking at expanding to other cities in Europe and around the world, as are many of the other providers. So the question really you asked, it's an important one. We do see some limitations today, but I think they're just temporary. And this thing's going to just explode, is my view, quite soon. Yeah,
it's been a really interesting journey. I think with Waymo, probably over a decade that we've sort of been following their progress, but it's like a lot of things in technology, you step back for a period and you see quite a big bit of change, but you don't necessarily notice a lot of change from day to day, week to week, month to month. But when you step back, there's a fair bit going on. And of course, there's Neuro as well, operating in the Valley, which is as a company co-founded by Kiwi. So we've had a chat with Dave Ferguson, co-founder of Neuro in the last little while with the little vehicles that can deliver food of varying kinds and so on. So lots and lots of things going on, and of course here in New Zealand a lot happening in the aerospace world, and some of that I was talking with a couple of the team from Whisk today, and so between New Zealand and Australia and the Bay Area and so on, they're working pretty hard on the autonomous air taxi future. So that's going to be an interesting one to follow. But again, you kind of look at it, and it can look as though really nothing's happening because we still don't have any autonomous air taxis yet. But when you delve in a bit closer, there's interesting progress on a bunch of fronts.
Yeah. Well, great points, and definitely big kudos to the work that's happening here. I think more people need to know that New Zealand is pioneering, is very much at the forefront of the flying vehicle industry, and great partnerships and great really clever ideas are coming out. And Whisk was the one that I also saw here at this event. I personally, I'm actually involved in a flying car company in the Valley called Aleph, and they were pretty much stealth for quite a while. Not a stealth vehicle, but more as in they didn't want to do any marketing or tell anybody much about what they were doing. but they did have to apply for FAA certification to kind of take it to the next step. And once you do that, it's public, right? And it just really about 3 months ago, 4 months ago, when the story kind of hit that Aleph had been awarded the certificate for a truly flying car. Now, when I say a flying car, it drives like a car and then just vertically takes off, and then it vertically goes down, and then you can park it in your garage. It's an actual car. As opposed to some of these sort of more drone flavored ones with very big propellers and some of them have a wingspan, and but this one is literally the size of a family car. And so the story was on the front, they were getting interviewed by everybody you can imagine on front page of every major newspaper, and TV channel had them interviewed. So they got a lot of orders, pre-orders. They're not manufacturing the mainstream product yet, but they're getting pre-orders. So I shared that because to your point, there are developments here that have been happening in the background. Some of them are starting to emerge. That may be surprising to folks. That whereas we might have talked in fantasy terms about a future of flying vehicles, and it's like it's fantasy. But in the reality is we're going to see some of this. I don't think my view on this, being relatively close to it, is I don't think I see that in any near term being mainstream. Maybe the founder of Aleph would say, well, we're trying to get the car into every garage in America. You're not going to have the distances at all really for a very long time, because you simply don't have the battery duration for long flight. So if you want to do little, if there's use cases where a 35-minute flight is exactly what you need, or there's a commercial service, this is going to be perfect. There's going to be enthusiasts. I mean, there's a decent market there for sure. But if you're going to buy a car and you have to choose between just a car and then a flying car, cost and utility and all that are probably going to limit it, as a mainstream way of getting around. And I go back to, will we own vehicles in the future? This is sort of the notion that every family, every person needs to own a vehicle. I just get the feeling that in a few decades we'll look back and think how crazy that was. That we all had to have own several tons of steel, fill it up with carbon, and to drive to the store and buy apples and oranges.
Yeah, well, if you put your futurist hat on and think, how might the world look 50 to 100 years from now? there are so many possibilities, right? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, well, I can look through my optimism lens or my pessimism lens. It depends which one I want to and how I feel. I personally trend towards optimism. I think even though the past and our times can feel bumpy, the line through all of it is upward and progressively better. Whether it's health outcomes or education or access to whatever you need. Today we see there's 8 billion people. We're squeezing out extreme poverty very, very fast. We're down to about 800 million people in extreme poverty. That's less than 10% of the planet. So it's still a horrific number, but it's remarkably better than it was 40 years ago, when well over a third of all people were in terrible circumstances. We've largely seen poverty being eliminated in China, for example, in one generation. Really remarkable. So I do feel that the condition for a single individual being born today, and the likelihood of them having a full, relatively healthy life is better than it's ever been, right? And during that life, access to clean water, clean air, a variety of food, good medicine. I think that all is much better, favorable in the future. And we seem to, to your point earlier about sometimes you can sort of say, why haven't we made more progress with, say, the carbon to non-carbon migration? So we're using more solar and hydro and wind. And if you looked at just the numbers right now, you might say, well, geez, we're not doing that much. But wow, if you look at the progress over the last 10 to 15 years, it's remarkable, like how much we've transitioned and how much we're adopting it. That said, there's a lot to go. And I think we'll continue in that direction. So again, 40, 50 years from now, I think we probably are very, very, or should I say, much less reliant on carbon energy. Great for the planet, great for the quality of our environment. But then, throw into the mix there's some other questions about what are we going to do? Like, what will people do work-wise in a world that's highly automated and a world of thinking machines? But I do think, on balance, I love to study history, and I bring history into a lot of my talks and books. And, you look at London sort of, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, this was not a good place. I mean, it was dirty, unsanitary, disease. It was violent, large parts of it, extreme poverty, violence, crime. And today the population is vastly bigger, right? I think the inner part of London has about 9 million people. And, it's a wonderful, prosperous place to be for the most part. I mean, I understand it's got challenges. And so we can take even the most complicated, polluted, problematic communities and turn them around. So I do think, looking out 30, 40 years, 50 years, cleaner, more efficient, more opportunity, but with some, major challenges around work and I think I don't really have a huge point of view on this in terms of our political problems. Maybe that's just a generational thing right now. Maybe it's sort of temporary. It's not an area I focus too much on, so I don't want to demonstrate any type of expertise because I don't have any. But that, I think, has to be just part of the number of dimensions that we think about when we think about the future.
Yeah, and you alluded to pessimistic sort of viewpoints there.
Yeah.
What are the things that have come to mind, or that have come across your path in terms of things that we need to be working to think ahead about, so that so we avoid some of those sort of pessimistic sort of outcomes?
Well, there's a few obvious ones, so I won't. I want to try to add some novelty here, but it's worth mentioning. I mean, more storms, more flooding, and more fires. Our communities are really being impacted by those now. We have to become more resilient, and so if we don't, the instant it appears that the frequency of bad environmental conditions will continue to increase, creating some ongoing issues. I don't think we want that. So environmentally, I think. That's a pessimistic outlook, is that we sort of just every year fires, every year, which creates bad quality air, destroys people's homes, flooding from these storms, from these levels of rain we've never seen before in places where there hasn't been that much rain, for example. So we got to get more resilient. We've got to figure out what's going on there. Hopefully a more carbonless future will help there too. There's a lot to be said about human migration. And this is maybe the topic we don't... that we talk about, but we don't talk about the right way, is, I remember I was at an event, a high-level event in South Africa a few years ago. And, South Africa, Africa has had a rough history, in a much better place today. But South Africa, stands out as the most successful economy on the continent. And, one of the leaders there was saying, in Africa, we got to get the economy's working. We've got to get the place working, and they seem to be doing a great job. Otherwise, we're talking about tens of millions of people migrating northward, and that's just an infrastructure challenge. I mean, you can imagine, we've seen some of it. Millions of people pouring into existing communities and cities. Very hard to manage that, and that is not only from sort of south to north, but east to west, and you see sort of all these kind of human migrationary issues. So that actually is a lot to do with economics, good economics, good and governance, democracy. So I think that's a sort of a challenge if we don't get that in some way managed. Those two, and I think probably the third one is the degree to which automation and AI takes over, entire parts of what humans do today, thus displacing maybe manual work a lot. And one projection says, over the next decade or so, we could see 800 million people become displaced in terms of their work, because what they do is just replaced by mechanics and automation. What do those people do? Maybe the last one, just again, just to be very sort of topical, and this is a ways out. Which is actually the thing that I think so many of us were understood and were taught something different, where we thought the future was all about population explosion and population problems of too many people. Well, as we get to the end of the century and into the 22nd century, the problem is actually depopulation, is actually the collapse.
Yeah.
And, depending how you sort of look at the data and sort of spin this, that could be devastating, right? Absolutely devastating. And not something I don't think you and I need to worry about too much in a sort of weird way, but certainly it could be ahead of us. And maybe this is kind of a little bit off topic, but just as a last point, is I don't think we've seen the last pandemic, and I don't think we've seen the worst pandemic. We dealt with COVID so badly in so many respects. We got lucky. I'm thinking about a really bad one with the same attitude and the same issues we had, and we're in trouble. I'm not sure whether we're paying attention to it right now. Like, as if we're so happy that we don't have to wear masks, and or we're happy with a little bit of like it used to be, right? But we ought to be, the right people ought to be thinking about preparing and being ready for the next one and managing it in a very different way. During the Black Death of the 1300s, 1200s, 1 in 2 people in Europe died. It was 50% of the population was wiped out in like very short time. They couldn't do nothing. 50%, 1 in 2 people. That. Fortunately, we didn't have that with COVID, but we could have that.
Yeah, there's, across this topic and probably all the things we've talked about, actually, there's a lot deeper we could go.
That's right.
They're big rabbit holes. I guess, as society, we've definitely had some challenges sort of coming through, and we're in a place now. There's lots of data on what are the lessons we can learn and so on, but of course those things can be interpreted in all sorts of different ways too. So very interesting times ahead. There's probably some other topics that were on the list there that would love to have dived in with you, but I'm mindful we've only got so much time. You've got a keynote coming up in a few minutes as well. So anything else that you wanted to sort of share as we finish up, and we'll have to not leave it so long between drinks before we podcast again, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, it's I always enjoy so much spending time with you and talking with you, and I love your questioning. I like how you kind of unpack the topics with your guests and with me. So thank you for that. Now, people are interested in my work. You can go to my website, Reichental.com. It's just my last name.com. I'm on LinkedIn, of course, and on Twitter, or X.com now. I have several books on these kind of topics. I would love for people to explore them and enjoy them. And then I got my online videos through LinkedIn Learning on these topics and more, going into a lot of more depth and sharing a lot of data, but also giving practical advice and making it actionable. So I'd love for your listeners to enjoy that and take advantage of all those things.
Great. Oh, thank you, Jonathan. And I'm sure we'll be able to put a link up there in the show notes as well, back to your website, so people can jump straight through from their app. It's been great to catch up. Thank you also to our show partners, to Gorilla Technology, HP, 2 Degrees, 1NZ and Spark NZ for their support, and thank you all for listening in, and we'll be back again next week with another episode. And thank you so much, Jonathan Reichental. Great to catch up. Great to have you back on the New Zealand Tech Podcast.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.